Hi guys, welcome to our Thursday afternoon meeting of the Rotary Club of Tyler. I want to welcome every one of you, especially if you're a guest visiting with us here today. Let me go ahead and remind you, we want to have everybody turn off their cell phones or put them on vibrate or whatever you want to do. We'll try to run through everything pretty quickly today to give our speakers today a little extra time. It's a topic we're going to discuss that's very relevant, and I'm sure there's going to be some questions that want to be asked. This time, I'd like to bring Dareth Bondurant up. Somebody please step outside and get Dareth, please. I'm here. And while we're doing that, I want to thank Vicki Conway, our pianist, before she sneaks out on me. Dareth's going to lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, and she's also going to lead us in our national anthem. And we're just a few days away from Memorial Day, and there's a second verse to the national anthem, which we think would be very appropriate, some of the lines in that. So she's going to sing that for us as well. So Dareth, go ahead and take it away.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight, for the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets' red glare, the bomb bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave? Oh, thus be it ever when freemen shall stand between their loved homes and the war's desolation, blessed with victory and peace, may the heaven-rescued land praise the power that hath made and preserved us a nation. Then conquer we must when our cause it is just, and this be our motto: in God is our trust, and the star-spangled banner in triumph shall wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave.
Absolutely beautiful, Bree. Thank you so much. And I want to thank our two impromptu greeters today, David Jones and where'd he go? Oh, Derek, you need to come back and lead us in a prayer.
Are you serious?
Yes, I'm serious.
Let's pray. Dear God, thank you so much for the hallowed ground where we live, where people have died and bled and sacrificed and suffered so that we could be here today and be happy and joyful and blessed. Dear God, thank you so much for all of the blessings that we receive generously from you. And those times when we're discouraged, we know that all things rest in your hands and that our steps are ordered, just as all of the ones who sacrificed and served were ordered. Dear God, thank you for your love. Thank you for Jesus who died to give us this freedom of life, liberty, and pray that we'll find in our hearts the service above self that makes justice reign and Jesus King. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. Okay, please be seated. And now I want to thank David Jones and a gentleman who's been visiting our club, just moved here from Colorado, Greg. I don't know where he is. Probably getting lunch, but thank you guys for both, David. And let's go ahead. And okay, that's what I did wrong. Let's go ahead and bring Paul Glasser up for This Week in History. I'll wait for you to do that.
There we go. Thank you, Bill. Starting today, 1927, Henry Ford and his son Edsel drove the 15 millionth Model T off the assembly line, marking the car's last day of production. Introduced in 1908, the Model T cost today's equivalent of the Model T cost today's equivalent of about $20,000, and it put automobile ownership within reach of average working Americans. On the 27th of May, 1941, amid the hope by Adolf Hitler that it would wreak havoc on Allied shipping to an embattled Great Britain, the 823-foot battleship Bismarck was sunk by British naval forces just 3 weeks after it was put to sea. The 3-day battle cost the British the battle cruiser Hood, along with all but 3 of that ship's crew. Only 115 of the 2,200 sailors aboard the Bismarck survived. On the 28th of May, 1957, baseball owners voted to allow the Brooklyn Dodgers and the New York Giants to move to Los Angeles and San Francisco, respectively. The Dodgers played their last game at Ebbets Field on September 24th, 1957. Anger about the move among Brooklynites continues to this very day. On the 29th of May in 1754, a young lieutenant colonel of the British Army led an attack on French forces that was later marked as the opening salvo of the French and Indian War. It was the officer's first combat engagement. That young officer would go on to defeat the army for which he once fought, that he fought that day. And he would follow that victory by becoming the first president of the United States. On the 30th of May, 1431, after having been convicted of heresy by an ecclesiastical tribunal for refusing to submit to church authority in favor of direct inspiration from God, Joan of Arc was burned at the stake at Rouen, France. As a source of military inspiration, Joan of Arc's execution helped turn the 100 Years' War firmly in France's favor. In 1920, just 489 years later, she was recognized as a Christian saint by the Roman Catholic Church. On the 31st of May, 1859, the clock, officially known as the Great Clock and incorrectly known as Big Ben, began operation at noon on Tuesday, May 31st. The clock is part of what was originally called St. Stephen's Tower, now called Elizabeth Tower, and was part of the rebuilding of the Houses of Parliament following a devastating fire in 1834. Big Ben is actually the name of the giant bell that sounds the top of the hour. It was named for the famously long-winded Sir Benjamin Hall, Big Ben. The tower has undergone restoration, began in 2017. The result of that was that Big Ben was silent until it rang in, the first of the year of this year, 2022. And on the 1st of June, 1938, featuring a character created by Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster, two high school students in Cleveland, Ohio, the first edition of Action Comics was published, and Superman made his debut. Birthdays in the coming week, starting today. Any Fleetwood Mac fans out there? Stevie Nicks turns 73 today. That means you're old too. Gladys Knight turns 78 on Saturday. No word on the Pips. Brooke Shields turns 57 on Tuesday. Clint Eastwood turns 92 on Tuesday. And actor Morgan Freeman turns 85 on Wednesday. That's this week in history.
Hey, Paul, what color was the Model T available in?
You had your choice of black or black.
That's right.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and bring Jim Schamberger up. We got things a little out of kilter earlier, but Jim's going to do introductions for us here.
We're delighted to have all the folks present today. I want to recognize those visiting at our various tables. This second table in the back, is it got any visitors back there? Would you please?
I'd like to introduce Stephanie Garcia and Stephanie tell you a little bit about herself.
Hi everyone, I'm Stephanie Garcia. I'm the owner of Tyler Neurocare Center. I am new actually here from Maui, lived there for 2 years and love it here in East Texas. I love it here. And yeah, so I specialize in PhD neurofeedback. That is a licensed psychotherapist, and I work with brain imaging and brain health, brain package analysis that I'm learning after concussions, anxiety, stress.
Delighted to have you.
I'd like to introduce my grandson, Caleb Culver, who's just in his first year of law school at the University of Miami.
Get your granddad straightened out before you leave, please. Okay. All right. Yes, sir.
I'd like to introduce my friend and neighbor, Bill Rich.
We're good to have you. All right, back table, back corner table. Everybody home? Okay. Home folks? How about the front table? Yes, sir.
I'm a brother, James Bailey here, and George.
James Bailey, and what was the other one? George. Good to have you all with us. All right, this front table.
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, this is my guest, Dave Thompson. So how weird could we have neurofeedback in the same guest at the same day? But yes, Dave has a non-para. It is microcurrent neurofeedback. It's offered at Camp B. It's free for veterans, and it is for all those anxiety. So I actually am going to. I have a little anxiety with the air show right now. So
No, can't be.
I need treatment. So if you want to add anything.
So, we right now we're helping vets at Camp B with PTSD, TBIs, traumatic brain injuries. But we also work with folks with anxiety, depression, strokes, ADD, all kinds of different mental health and neurological issues.
Anyone else visiting with us today? All right. President Bill, you got it.
All right, thank you, Jim. Okay, Rotary business. Sign up for the end of the year party as we pass the torch to Allison Camry and we celebrate the end of the regime of Bill Pascal. Okay?
All right, that's enough.
And the monthly board meetings tomorrow at Altra Federal Credit Union at the corner of Loop 323 and State Highway 155. And as I've always said, you don't have to be a member of the board to come to the board meetings. We usually start together around 11:30. You bring your own lunch, and then we kick off the meeting about, we kick it off at 12 and we leave, or we end the meeting at 1. You don't have to leave if you don't want to. The International Convention is coming to Houston, June 4th through 8th. Holly needs your volunteer hours. Our program for next week is Scott Martinez. He's head of the Tyler Economic Development Council. And now it's time to bring up the world's greatest president-elect. Please welcome Allison Camry as he introduces this week's speakers.
I could never live up to that. That's amazing. Today we have with us Chris and Christy Hill, who serve as co-directors for the faith-based nonprofit organization Program for Humanitarian Aid. The mission of PHA is connecting vulnerable Ukrainian youth with a community who provides loving guidance toward healthy lives in Christ. After 11 years of marriage and successful careers in secular jobs, God placed this ministry on their hearts. Chris and Christy became involved with PHA as volunteers in 2012, and since 2014, they have served in a full-time capacity as directors and overseers of the work in both Ukraine and in America. Both are graduates of Texas A&M University. They reside in Tyler and typically travel to the country of Ukraine several times a year. Since their time as directors, the current work of the PHA has grown from a vision stage into a fully developed ongoing ministry serving hundreds of orphans and at-risk youth in the Ukraine. Since the war in Ukraine began on February 24th of this year, PHA's focus necessarily has had to shift. While their mission of serving vulnerable Ukrainian youth has not changed, in this time of crisis, they are fully living into the humanitarian aid roots. I present to you Chris and Christy for our program this morning.
Well, in case anybody's curious, you get the name Program for Humanitarian Aid when an engineer names your work. You get something really specific. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today to share a little bit about what PHA is doing in Ukraine today and what we've been doing in the past leading up to this. We're thankful to be a part of the Rotary Club of Tyler and are just grateful for the encouragement and support that's come from so many of you in this room during this challenging time. It's kind of impossible to talk about what PHA is doing today without sharing what we've been doing for the last 9 years in Ukraine. Around age 16, orphans and at-risk youth begin to leave the institutional systems in which they are raised in Ukraine. And without intervention, their lives can typically be defined by some pretty scary words. Words like suicide, homicide, prostitution, prison, homelessness, and life in the streets.
However, the PHA family is all about intervention, and we help vulnerable Ukrainian youth make the transition from a traumatized past into a hopeful future. And the majority of the kids that we work with will never have the opportunity to be adopted. So we have what we call our transition program. That's a program that helps them leave a life raised in an institution and make the transition from there into successful adulthood. Through our transition program, kids learn life skills such as how to cook, how to clean, how to make and use a budget, they receive tutoring and legal help. And through a network of local Ukrainians, they receive mentorship. They learn about healthy life behaviors, and most importantly, are shown Christ's love. Before the war started in Ukraine, we had active ministry in 3 different cities in the eastern part of the country, serving hundreds of kids. I want to share with you a short video that gives a brief summary of what our work looked like before the war started on February 24th.
PHA is being family.
PHA is being family.
PHA is being family.
PHA is being family.
PHA is being family. But that's a lot more than just our tagline.
PHA is being family when we love, support, and care for our kids.
When we play with them.
When we introduce them to Christ.
When we help them with documents and paperwork.
When we teach them to cook. And we hug them.
When we dance with them.
When we spend time together at camp.
When we share life struggles.
PHA is big family.
Thank you for being part of the PHA family.
PHA's mission is to connect vulnerable Ukrainian youth to a community who provides love and guidance towards healthy lives in Christ. While our mission has not changed in this time of crisis, we're really living into our humanitarian aid roots. Since the war began on February 24th, our ministry efforts have had to shift. And while we're still caring for those kids we've cared for all along, our Ukrainian ministry partners are having to try to find ways to provide humanitarian aid and relief.
The United Nations published an article on May 5th of this year, and I want to read to you part of that article. Since February 24th, nearly 12.8 million people are estimated to have been displaced in Ukraine, most of whom have not left the country. According to the most recent estimates, 7.7 million people are internally displaced as a result of the conflict, which is equivalent to 17.5% of the entire population. These people have had to leave their homes and everything behind in a desperate attempt to escape death and destruction. They are traumatized and need urgent protection, including psychological support. The conflict has been causing extreme human suffering, with thousands of civilians killed and injured, and countless others living through daily bombardment and violence. Homes, schools, hospitals, care institutions, and entire cities have been destroyed. Mines and explosive remnants of war continue to pose alarming threats to those remaining in their homes and those fleeing the conflict. We are appalled by the disturbing reports of violations of international human rights law and violations of international humanitarian law, which may amount to war crimes. The humanitarian situation is dire. Internally displaced people, the majority of whom are women and children, have lost everything they had: their homes, their belongings, their livelihoods, their support networks, and in many cases, their loved ones. Many of them face shortages of food, water, basic items, energy, and lack of access to health services and medication. Ukraine is a country of approximately 44 million people. And if you watch the news, you may get the impression that most Ukrainians have left Ukraine. But in fact, approximately 88% of the country remains in Ukraine. 7.7 million Ukrainians, which is 17.5% of their population, are internally displaced. And PHA is focused on serving inside of Ukraine today. We have the structure, we have the systems, and we have the local people in place to meet the needs of the internally displaced Ukrainian population.
We're very proud to be a Ukrainian-led ministry. All our work in Ukraine is done by Ukrainian nationals, and they're serving in 3 cities in the eastern part of Ukraine. And we're very fortunate to be able to still get funding directly to those staff members. And when we send funds into Ukraine, they're not going to just some random unknown hands. They're going to Andre, our Ukrainian director that was dancing in the video earlier. They're going to Ilya, Zina, Marina, Sergey, Eljun, people that we've known for a long time that we have a trusted relationship with. And we're in constant communication with them. So we get to hear more than just about the needs. We get to see the stories and the photos and the reports and the receipts of how those needs are actually being met. We're currently helping with relief efforts in a variety of ways. But one of the main ways we're serving is through local churches in the towns we've worked in for years. As the people come through these cities, they need help. We're able to provide them with fuel, food, blankets, medicine, hygiene kits, and help them with transportation and housing relocation costs. PHA staff is serving however they feel led, however they feel called to serve in the communities around them as they continue to serve the kids they've served all along. In the eastern part of the country, we're serving in Dnipro, Zaporizhia, and Kamenskoye. And the help that we're providing is to people that are making their way west from the eastern part of the country where the fighting's been worse, as they're trying to get somewhere that's at least deemed to be somewhat safer. And this journey used to take 16 hours, depending where they're going. And now it takes days to get to Western Ukraine.
As of May 23rd, over 125,000 internally displaced people have been accepted in the city of Zaporizhia alone. That's where our Ukrainian director, Andre, and his wife, Marina, live. Of those, about 34,000 of them were children. 15 to 20% of these people are choosing to stay in Zaporizhia, and the rest of them are continuing their journey on to the west or making the decision to cross the border into neighboring European countries. So another way that we're helping the internally displaced people is by supporting the large government-run refugee centers. These centers are being set up for people coming out of places like Mariupol, Donetsk, Lugansk, that Donbass region that you've heard so much about in the news recently. And the help that we're providing them is they contact Andre and they say, we need food, we need medicine, we need hygiene kits. And he takes those to them. But we're also providing emotional support, spiritual support, because in times like this, for these people that are coming out of these most extreme parts of the war zone, a warm smile and a hug and a prayer are often as essential as food. PHA has long been established in Zaporizhia, Ukraine. We have long-term relationships with orphanages there. When the war started, if an orphanage held mostly true orphans, and a true orphan is just what you think, a kid with no family, no support system, anything like that. If they held mostly true orphans, those orphans were usually evacuated completely out of the country. If it was an orphanage that held mostly social orphans, kids that had been removed from a troubled home for a variety of different reasons, those kids were mostly sent back to those types of families. You might imagine it was a difficult situation to keep a pod of about 200 kids in one place. Most of the orphanages we work with house around 200 children. Food had stopped being delivered to the orphanages, and it was also feared that they would be a target for the Russians. One of the smaller orphanages we work with out in a village had over 100 true orphans at it. These kids went days without food, without electricity, and that was when it was still really cold in Ukraine. Finally, we were able to help them get evacuated all the way to Poland, but not before the Russians occupied their village and shelled and destroyed part of the orphanage.
We've had a long relationship with an orphanage inside the city of Zaporizhia. And we've always worked to make sure we can meet the needs of the orphans and at-risk youth that are living there. Well, most of the kids at that orphanage were actually social services kids. So when the fighting started, as Christy said, they were sent back home to whatever extended family could be found. But once that orphanage was empty, the director of the orphanage opened it up to refugees. Currently, there's over 100 refugees living in this orphanage facility. Over 40 of them are children, and PHA is providing all their food. Andre goes to the store, he buys the food, he delivers it, the orphanage staff cooks the meals for everyone there. And while our primary focus has been serving the people who are still inside of Ukraine, we are partnering with the refugee center in Romania, where a lot of people are crossing the border. In addition to those efforts, we're partnering with several organizations to stockpile medical and other supplies in Western Ukraine. Once we get materials together, there's an organization called the Volunteer Brothers that's sprung up since the war started. They drive van loads of supplies to eastern Ukraine and give them to individuals to distribute it in their own community, like Andre in Zaporizhia. He gets these medical supplies, he places an order, and he's able to give it to the people he knows in his community that are in need.
And although we are serving in a lot of new ways, we have not abandoned our PHA family of kids. In fact, a lot of them are serving alongside of us now, and a lot of them are also serving in the Ukrainian military. Sadly, recently one of our young men, Vita, was killed in some of the fighting. Vita was one of the goofiest, silliest, most fun-loving kids you could meet. He was involved in our work for several years. He was always a junior counselor at our summer camps, ministering to kids who grew up in tough situations just like him. He was a kid that Chris and I knew very well. The last time we heard from Vita was on May 12th. Some of you met Tanya, our ministry partner, and her young son that had been with her in Tyler for about 2 months now. And Tanya and I were sitting on the couch, and she said, Vita just texted me. He's in some really heavy fighting and needs our prayers. That was on May 12th. After that, we heard all kinds of things. We heard he was killed. We heard he was captured by the Russians. We heard he was injured and taken into a European country, but no one heard from him. And his body wasn't found until this Tuesday, when he was identified from the photo of a deceased soldier. And today was his funeral. One of our ministry partners, Marina, who works in Dnipro in the eastern part of the country, sent me these words on Tuesday. She said, it's Tuesday, May 24th. It's the 90th day of the war. I read about it on social media. It's on the news. I hear people talking about it. But I don't want to keep track of the days. Maybe it's weird, but it makes me think then you'll just have to go on with the count. I want today, whatever day it is, to be the last day of war. I want the killings and deaths to stop. I want the explosions and airstrikes to stop. I want families reunited, brothers, fathers, sons to be back with their loved ones. But for some, that's never going to happen. It's possible to choose not to notice the war, especially when it's 100 kilometers or 60 miles for those of us from Texas, from the city you live in. But then the realization hits you, it's only 100 kilometers away. And for some, it's in their home, it's in their yard, and it's right before their eyes. The airstrikes are getting closer to our city. Yesterday, we had 12 air sirens all in one afternoon, and we had 5 airstrikes. The closest one was in the suburb of our city. The railway tracks are damaged, more power lines are destroyed, and another oil refinery was blown up. But no news like that can ever compare with the news of the death of someone you knew. The war in Ukraine has created an immeasurable amount of need, and there are many great organizations helping to meet those needs, Rotary International being one of those. PHA is thankful to be one of those organizations. We are thankful that we have long-time trusted relationships inside of Ukraine. We are thankful for our partners there. We are thankful for their servants' hearts and the fact that they are tirelessly serving their fellow countrymen. We are thankful that we are still able to get funding into Ukraine, and we are eternally grateful for everyone in America who continues to provide that funding.
PHA as being family is far more than just a tagline to Christy and I. It's something that we take very seriously when we're talking about our kids. Andre, our Ukrainian director, recently sent us this quote. He said, I think that the PHA family has 2 different worlds within one organization. It may even be correct to say that PHA is between 2 different worlds. One is made up of people who provide financial help and support for the ministry. And the other world is made up of people who need financial help and support. The war in Ukraine is growing the PHA family. Between the people who need and the people who have come out of the woodwork to help the people in need, the PHA family is growing in Ukraine and the U.S. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. Thank you for so many questions we've gotten over the last couple of months and people who generously and genuinely care about what's happening. And we wanted to make sure we had plenty of time to answer questions because we've had lots of questions since this all started. So we'd love to answer any questions now.
Why Ukraine when you were getting started?
I actually make fun of my wife about this, and so I'm glad you asked that. So Christy started in on wanting to go on a mission trip. I had zero interest in going on a mission trip, and it's literally just the first opportunity that arose. We agreed to go, and I give her a hard time now, and I say, you know, when she was thinking about ministry back in the day, she was meaning like shorts, flip-flops, somewhere tropical in Mexico probably. But the reality of it is, especially before the war, every need we fight in Ukraine, you could fight in Smith County. Every reason that a kid is in government care in Ukraine happens in Smith County. Every kid that falls through the cracks in Ukraine falls through the cracks in our foster care system here. So past that's where God put us. I don't really have much of an answer to that.
Do you know any of the language?
Shoot, shoot.
Yes.
That means a little bit. We speak a little bit of Russian. We are not fluent by any means. We understand a little more than we speak, which I think is the case with most foreign languages. There's a lot of discussion of what is the primary language in Ukraine. Ukrainian is the official language of Ukraine, but we work primarily in the eastern part of the country. So all of our staff members, Russian is the language they speak in their homes. Several of them are starting to switch to Ukrainian since the war started. They all speak both languages, and most of them a couple of other languages as well. But we speak a little bit of Russian. Once we got to the point where we could travel around the country by ourselves and grocery shop and things like that, our studying went down drastically.
And Christy and I have been all over Ukraine, eastern and western Ukraine, even though our work has primarily been in eastern Ukraine. And you hear a lot made of, and Russia has made a lot of, Russian speakers being persecuted in Ukraine. And I would tell you that is not true. I'm sure there has been some random examples of it, but we traveled with Russian speakers all over the country and met one person who didn't want to talk to us.
One old babushka would not sell us cookies because we were only speaking Russian.
Yeah.
I was overcome.
So it's really something that a lot has been made out of that isn't really that solid.
What the media tells us about Ukraine over against what you know about Ukraine, what's the biggest discrepancy that you see?
It's worse than if anything, it's worse than what you see on the news. The atrocities, the suffering that people are going through. But for once, I feel like a lot of the news portrayal has been pretty accurate on some of these events. You know, what you're seeing coming out of Mariupol, coming out of Bucha, the mobilization. One thing that has been a misconception that's probably come from the news is the U.S., and Christy talked about this a little in the presentation. You know, we encounter people who think that, you know, Ukraine has just emptied out. Well, that's not true. There also really hasn't been a draft instituted yet. Everyone we know fighting in Ukrainian services chose to go fight. There may be somebody who's been drafted, but there has not been widespread draft. Men aren't allowed to leave the country.
And men have to register in the city that they're in, so that way the government knows where they are. But that's one of the biggest discrepancies, and Chris, I think, hit on it. It's actually a lot worse. I don't know if you've seen some of the news here. There's a big group that's come out of Mariupol that has some ties to Rose Heights Church and Serving Orphans Worldwide, which is another great local nonprofit here. And the other night we had kind of a big barbecue for a bunch of different Ukrainians, some coming out of Mariupol, Lugansk, and a couple other places. And hearing the stories that they tell are so much worse than anything you'll see on the news.
Good.
In the Wall Street Journal, I think it was yesterday, it said that the disruption of the harvesting of grain, like wheat, in Ukraine and southern Russia is so great that they may not be able to get that to Egypt, which supplies it all the way down into Africa. There's 400 million in famine within 2 months.
That's a big concern. In fact, the article from the UN, I didn't read the whole thing, but it mentioned that pretty heavily as well. We know, seen lots of pictures of farmers putting on their bulletproof vests and getting on their tractors, trying to get their crops started. But then also the soldiers have stolen lots of the grain supply.
And the farming equipment and mined fields, wheat fields.
Also, in the Wall Street Journal this morning, they talked about that Russia has eliminated their top age that you can go into the military, which makes me think they're getting desperate for troops. Also makes you think, your friends over Ukraine, Putin gets really desperate if he's going to use a tactical nuclear weapon. Do you have your friends over there expressing that fear?
Very much so. And, you know, we have staff members who lived through Chernobyl area, and so they're more familiar with what can happen if nuclear weapons were to be used. They've seen firsthand what can come from something like that.
And we see them sharing things in their social media feeds these are the steps to take. This is what doctors recommend if there was some kind of chemical or nuclear attack.
Somebody here probably knows much more about this than I do, but there's been a lot of stockpiling of some kind of thyroid medicine that's supposed to be taken if you're exposed to radiation. So it's a very, very genuine, deep concern, and it's pretty well universally agreed that Putin is getting more and more desperate and not likely to just go, well, I was wrong, I'm gonna go home. So.
You said the two orphans are moved or transferred to Poland. So your organization funds them in Poland, or is it strictly Ukraine in that process?
It kind of depends on the situation. The one orphanage that was transferred to Poland, we're still supporting them to a certain extent. We haven't had to support them housing wise or nutritional needs or things like that because the Polish government has actually been providing for that. We have been supporting a lot of the orphanage staff that is there because you have a group of, I think, 106 kids and maybe 7 or 8 teachers that are with them. And those teachers are doing everything from teaching to crowd control to emotional support to sports to just every part of their days.
You know, the EU countries have really been pretty amazing towards Ukrainian refugees. Dropped a lot of border crossing restrictions and given them 2 or 3 years to stay and allowed to work. And so it's been pretty open doors, but it's still hard. We're seeing lots and lots of Ukrainians who left are going back. Deciding, you know, I don't want to be away from my husband. I don't want to be away from my family. I have a home. I have a life. How long can I just stay here and willing to risk it? As a matter of fact, Tanya that works with us is going back to Romania on Sunday. She wants to see her husband.
And going back to the military aspect, like her husband, for instance, he was in the military reserves. And when they went from Kyiv, first went to in the western part of Ukraine, and he registered with the military office there. And they called him and they said, if you're ready to come, we're ready for you. And he had a choice, but he decided he was ready to go back into active service. And he's been on the border of Slovakia serving as a border guard, but he can get the call any day. He's been doing a lot of trainings that he may have to go back towards the eastern part of the country. So that's part of Tanya's motivation to go back and try to see her husband, have her son, see his dad one last time. So.
I was wondering, you might have talked about this, but about the supply chain and just all of the supplies that you have to provide. Are you running into any challenges with that?
It's super challenging. We've been sending over in partnership with another church, basically medical kits, emergency medical trauma kits, thank you, that soldiers can wear on their legs, strapped to their leg. Mm-hmm. It's getting hard to get tourniquets in the U.S. because of how much of a drain there is going that way, much less in Romania and Poland and all those countries in England. A lot of medical supplies, trauma-related supplies are getting very scarce. In the cities that haven't, not Mariupol, that has been just demolished, but in the cities that have had fighting, but not that level of fighting, you can walk into the grocery store and Andre will buy hundreds of pounds of macaroni for these refugee centers and stuff. So those things are available, but there's no salt right now in Zaporizhia. So it's kind of a mixed bag. Fuel is becoming the biggest shortage in Ukraine.
Mm-hmm. Everywhere.
The Rotary Club in Tyler have a tradition of hosting exchange students.
Mm-hmm.
Your organization should need housing and resources. I'd say look no further than the Rotary Clubs of Tyler.
That's great. I appreciate that. Go ahead. Sorry.
I was just going to say we've had that offer several places, and that's something that there may very well be a need for one day, and we're really appreciative of this list of resources we can keep in the back of our mind. But we talked about most of Ukrainians are staying in Ukraine. And so people have come up to us and said, if you have a housing need for someone, let us know. And right now we haven't had many of our people or even people we know of have those needs. I will say this, the people that have come out of places like Mariupol, that's a different situation. Those people have been through extreme trauma. Those people have been in basements for months at a time under really terrible conditions. And so some of those people have left, have gone through Tijuana, have wound up in Tyler, Texas, and they're not going back.
Yeah, that's kind of what we've seen across, we know lots of international organizations we interact with have relationships. The Ukrainians that have come to the U.S. and are planning to stay are generally speaking coming from areas where they can't go back to. There's nothing left to go back to. Unfortunately, that hasn't been the case in the cities.
Even Tanya, that's been here with us, her and her husband lived in Kyiv. They have an apartment there. As far as they know, it's still okay. It hasn't been damaged. But Bucha, that you heard a lot about in the news about a month ago, that's 10 kilometers from their house.
What does the man on the street have to say? We hear all kinds of things on the media about the attitude of the people and whether they feel positive or negative. What do you see of the man on the street in generality?
It's funny, most of our Ukrainian staff before the war would have told you, I don't care about politics. I don't follow politics. As a matter of fact, Tanya that works with us and has been here, she and her husband Vanya were in the U.S. about 5 years ago. And anytime anyone would ask him about Ukrainian politics, he'd say, ask Chris, I don't follow it. But now that has changed. Everyone we know in Ukraine is in step with Zelensky, the president of Ukraine, and is very adamant that they will not give any concessions to Russia. And, you know, I kind of have mixed feelings about that because that means it's not going to stop anytime soon, likely. But they're very adamant that they will not give up lands, which is a very different feeling than they had in 2014. People were much less patriotic and driven.
Someone asked Tanya the other day, said, do Ukrainians feel supported by America? And she said, to her knowledge, yes. She said, you know, maybe we wish that support would have looked differently at some times, but also we feel like without the support, we wouldn't be in the position we are now.
Yes.
Your main goal are your jobs for fundraising, not so much boots on the ground, but fundraising. And I want to follow up with asking, so do you have an annual goal for
Sure. So we are the co-executive directors. And it's a small nonprofit, so we wear a lot of hats. We do all the marketing, all the accounting, all the oversight, everything in between. We have one other American that works with us, and he's our development officer. And our annual budget's about $500,000. That's changed slightly since the war started. We've just gotten a new approved budget through with our board, but our typical year is it's about $500,000.
And it's very important to us and has been since the very beginning that we don't want American staff leading the work in Ukraine. We want Ukrainians leading the work in Ukraine. That's been very important to us.
And one thing too, Dorothy, since the war started, some of our costs in Ukraine have gone down because some of our work has shifted. And so one thing that we've been able to say is that money that's donated right now is going completely into relief efforts because we met the rest of our budget between donors and pledges to the rest of the year and what we had before the war started to take care of the rest of that portion of our budget. So if you're able to donate now, it's going straight to our relief efforts.
Is the Zelensky government, is the Ukrainian government aware of you? Do you have any interface with the government there?
We have
a legal nonprofit in Ukraine, and we interact with the local government. Zelensky's probably never heard of Chris Hill, but the local governments we interact with, and that has actually increased since the war started because being the fact we already had a registered nonprofit, we already knew government individuals, we basically got pre-approved on some of the aid that the government is providing, and we're allowed to help to distribute.
A lot of debate on the cable shows about is or is not the government of Ukraine corrupt. What's your opinion on that?
So it's better than it used to be. It's far from perfect. When we first started going to Ukraine, it was horrible. I mean, the level of corruption was ridiculous. Literally, you'd go to an orphanage and the director would be driving a Range Rover and they don't make that kind of money.
And the kids would be starving.
And the kids would be starving with no socks in the winter. It is drastically better. Zelensky's been good about that. Before the war, a lot of Ukrainians felt like he was still falling short of that. So it's far from perfect.
And the previous president, Poroshenko, made a lot of efforts to try to correct some of that corruption too. So it's better, but Ukraine still always makes the list of top corrupt countries in the world.
If you were just to say, take a western city like Tyler, and a typical, the same size city in Ukraine, and index the degree of development to the Tyler, what's their degree degree of economic development?
That's a great question.
On a 0 to 100.
So a city like Tyler's, population of Tyler, that would be a village in Ukraine. Because even like Zaporizhia that we work in, that's a city of 1 million people, and that's not the largest city in Ukraine. But you can get, even in some of these cities, it's more like a, I guess a second world country would be a way to describe it. I mean, there's Wi-Fi everywhere. You may see more of a Porsche and a Range Rover and a Lamborghini, but the majority of the people don't have a vehicle.
And never will.
And never will. You still see a lot of 3 generations all living in the same small apartment. But you can buy most products in the store, things like that.
What's the level of westernization? I mean, is there?
Oh, off the charts, off the charts. Very westernized, very exposed to anything we're exposed to here. Because everything's on the internet, so. And American brands are very popular there. They want American clothes, so.
You see a lot of our kids wearing T-shirts with English on them that they have no clue what it says. But
You know, if you really want to impress people, you don't buy a Mercedes, which you can get from close countries. You import a Dodge Charger, then you're really cool.
But thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and share with you today. And thank you for all the encouragement you've been to us.
Christy, this has been a wonderful presentation, very timely, very informative. And on behalf of all the club members here, we want to present each of you with one of these certificates. We'll donate a book to the Literacy Council in each of your names. And again, we thank you for your hard work and effort over there in the Ukraine. And we just hope and pray that the situation gets better for everybody.
Appreciate that.
Okay. All righty. So let's move along here. And it's time for our Ace of Diamonds Award. Jim, how much do we have this week?
We've got $2,430 and 38 cards.
38 cards. Christy, you want to draw a ticket for us, please?
Sure. $220.
220. Who has that? All right, Denise's guest has got that. You sure what to do, Jim? If you draw the right card, if you draw the Ace of Diamonds, you get to keep half, and the other half goes to Denise. So you keep a quarter.
Yeah.
The other quarter goes to Denise. The rest goes to me. I mean the club. Sorry.
No. 9 of hearts.
9 of hearts. All right. Okay, guys, this has been a great meeting. Dara, thank you so much for the second verse of the national anthem. Very nicely done. And again, it's been a pleasure to have all of you today, especially the visitors or any visiting Rotarians. You better join the club or I'm going to hunt you down. I mean, anyhow, guys, let's go ahead and stand for the 4-way test of the things we think, say, or do as Rotarians. First, second, third, fourth, and we are dismissed.
Is it? You don't have to go home.